Okay, today we're going to talk about figurative language and how we find it in The Lord of the Rings. So you should have watched a video that went through some types of figurative language, and there's a quizzes that had some more kind of vocabulary words you can use. This is me trying to go through how would I apply those terms to a text. So that's why we're doing The Lord of the Rings. So one very common type of figurative language is a simile. So that's when you have a comparison using like or as. So in the text of Lord of the Rings, it says, Bilbo says, "I feel thin, sort of stretched like butter scraped over too much bread." So that would be an actual quote you could use in your text, and you could talk about maybe the character development of Bilbo and what what this simile says about him. Maybe other comparisons that are used in there in the text to talk about, Frodo and Bilbo and other like characters. So you could group them together, or you could just use this as some vocabulary word to talk about a bigger concept. But that would be an example that I could find in the text. A metaphor is when you use a familiar example to explain a more complex one. So Sam says to Frodo, "It's dangerous. It's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out of your door. You step into the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to." So this is an example of metaphor, and to me this is a pretty important one because, we know Lord of the Rings is an adventure, right? So they're comparing this adventure that Frodo's going to go on to just stepping out your door and not being sure what's going to happen. So I think that you could really look into that metaphor and what Tolkien's trying to say with that. This one's kind of obvious symbolism, so something that stands for or suggests something else. So obviously the ring is a symbol in the text that stands for, power, or, how power can corrupt people, even evil, desires or something. So you could say that the symbol is a lot of things. It's kind of what you see in that symbol. I would say that a symbol is different than a metaphor. They're similar in that they're trying to get you to look at something by comparing it with something else. But a symbol is something that would actually be in the text. Like there's going to actually be an object of some kind, right? So just for your information as you're going along. Illusion, they don't have any. I didn't find any illusion, at least in Lord of the Rings, because it's such a self-contained world. But this is when you bring something from another text or another context and talk about it in your text. So if we were to write a different text or short story or something and we talked about my precious, a lot of people would understand that that is alluding to the ring and the Lord of the Rings. So that would be how you could use an allusion from Lord of the Rings. Onomatopoeia, that's when a word sounds like or mimics the word it is describing. So Gollum sounds like the name. His name sounds like the noise he makes. Personification is when you attribute human characteristics to inanimate objects. So there's this eye in Lord of the Rings that, is always watching. It's trying to get the ring. It's almost its own character. The way they talk about it, it's like another person. And it is kind of tied to a person, but it's not an actual person, right? This one's maybe a little tricky of an example because personification, it's inanimate objects, right? So a scarf can go dancing across the floor, or, a chair can, squeak slowly or something. This is more like something that's totally not even tied to a human at all. But they're trying to explain it as if it is a human. So that would be personification. Hyperbole. So that's when you have an over-exaggeration that you use for emphasis. This one's kind of a long one, but the part that I would point you to is this thing at the end. They're talking about Gandalf, how he could... he has enough mirth to set a kingdom laughing. So that's an over-exaggeration, the kingdom part. Obviously, a whole kingdom laughing because of what he says is probably not quite literal, but this is trying to get you to think through, how much, joy he has the possibility of giving. An idiom is a commonly used expression. So this would be like phrases that we say a lot, or even like cliche kind of things. So again, this is Lord of the Rings is kind of self-contained, so it's kind of hard to find an idiom of a commonly used expression, but this one seems to allude to, in this world, this is an idiom. Let us remember that a traitor may betray himself and do good that he does not intend. So that's supposed to help you kind of come to the conclusion of the idiom, and it carries the weight of that with it. Metonymy is when you refer to something by a related association. So it's kind of similar to symbolism almost, in that this is something that stands in for an idea or a group or an organization or something, but it's not actually that thing. So in Lord of the Rings, they often talk about the folly of men, and that is, referring to mankind in general. There's not like just one, group of men. I guess maybe you could talk about there are some men, but when they talk about the folly of men, that is, men is standing in for all of mankind, right? So this would be like if you talk about the stock market, which would really be talking about, the traders in stock market, the ups and downs of the economy and that kind of thing. That would be standing in for that idea. Oxymoron is when you have two words or ideas that are in contrast to one another, placed side by side. Such is off the course of deeds that move the wheels of the world. Small hands do them because they must, while the eyes of the great are elsewhere. So it's this idea of the small hands next to these great eyes, right? And that kind of brings out that idea that the small are doing something great. Juxtaposition is related to this, although you don't have to have contrast in this. So this one is maybe a little confusing. I don't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve. Maybe that's more of an idiom. But the idea is more that you're putting two things next to each other to highlight something. So that's not necessarily a contradiction. It's just juxtaposing is putting two things together. Although it can be a contraction. That can be just a word that you use within your text analysis. In fact, all of these are really just using the words of literary analysis or text analysis that helps you sound more credible in your writing. So that's why I'm introducing you to all these terms and kind of giving you some examples, is because that helps you sound more academic. This last one is alliteration, repetition of the same sound at the start of one or more words. Technically, this is more like seashells down by the seashore kind of thing. But I thought this had a repetition of even though it's words, there was a repetition factor here. I don't know, maybe somebody can argue with me about that one, but one ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. That repetition of that phrase over and over again kind of makes you pay attention to the words that are being said there and what they mean. So, okay, that's just kind of my more in-depth look at some terms of literary language in The Lord of the Rings. This would be what you would want to start doing for your short story, going through and just finding, hey, what are the instances of metonymy or idiom or metaphor, and what maybe they're trying to point you towards in the story. And again, and not all short stories will have all of them, but they will all have some of these. So that's one way to kind of start taking it apart and look at it. So, all right, let me know if you have questions.